Dear learners, I am Christina Georgy. I welcome you to my session on literary criticism and theory. Today we will focus our attention towards one of the most widely discussed contemporary literary theories, that is postcolonialism. Dear learners, before moving further, let me clarify that this is a specialized session specifically designed for the MEG learners. Hence, all the aspects discussed here will be solely based on or limited to the prescribed syllabus and study material for the same. Hence, we are discussing the course code MEG-5 titled Literary Criticism and Theory. Regarding post-colonialism, we've already seen an introduction to the basics of post-colonialism with specific focus on Edward Said. So now you are listening to part 2 of my lecture on post-colonialism.
Now moving on to Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak. Alright, so she is a leading contemporary feminist. When I say contemporary, do you think she is still alive? Yes, she is alive. She is also active in the field of deconstruction and she deals with issues of race and gender. When we speak about Spivak, you can never mention her without referring to the term subaltern. Subalternity is a concept put forth by Gayatri Spivak, and she actually borrowed this term subaltern from Antonio Gramsci. You must have heard about Gramsci, I believe. So she has been influenced by the Italian thinker Gramsci, and Gramsci referred to a subordinate position in terms of class, race and culture with respect to this particular word subaltern. So in simple terms, subaltern, this term according to Gramsci referred to a subordinate position with respect to certain aspects such as class, gender, race, culture, etc. So there is this important essay written by Spivak titled "Can the Subaltern Speak?" So this very title is very much significant. Can the subaltern speak? So we refer to subaltern as somebody of a subordinate position, inferior in rank, right? So the interesting aspect is that will the voice of such a person be heard, or will that person have the freedom to speak in public? Can the subaltern speak? And even if this person speaks, will that be heard? So this essay was addressed in order to effectively demonstrate how the subaltern woman is constructed, as absent or silent or not listened to. So in this essay, Can the Subaltern Speak?, Spivak addresses the way the subaltern woman, here it is the gendered aspect that is mentioned, that is, in case of women, they are doubly marginalized. What do you mean by double marginalization? Firstly, because of their subaltern status. Secondly, because of their gender, that is, they are a community who is less privileged, okay, because they are women and also subaltern. Hence it is mentioned in the text as subaltern women, okay. So Spivak mentions the way the subaltern woman is constructed as absent or silent or not listened to, without giving much importance to this particular identity or individual as such. So the muteness of women in post-colonial societies is the main issue which her work confronts. So Spivak deals with the muteness of women in post-colonial societies. What does that mean? They were not given much freedom to raise their voices. And regarding the main argument of Can the Subaltern Speak?, it is regarding patriarchy and imperialism. The main argument of Spivak's essay is that between patriarchy and imperialism, subject constitution and object formation, the figure of women disappears not into a pristine nothingness but into a marginal position between tradition and modernization. Hence, she becomes doubly effaced. EFFACED. That is a term. You could see that towards the end of this chapter too. Okay, marginal position between tradition and modernism. So, Spivak uses the term subaltern with the meaning of lower rank for women, blacks, the colonized and the working class. So, this is also important. Earlier we discussed how Gramsci referred to this term. Now we are referring to how Spivak refers to this term in the particular work and the subaltern speak. So she uses the term for women, blacks, the colonized and the working class. Now, what do you mean by subalternity? It comes to suggest the repressive dominance of white Western thinking and an allegory of displacement of the gendered and colonized subject by the imposition of narratives of internationalism and nationalism. That is how the Westerners overpower the marginalized. The violence inflicted by Western forms of thought upon the East is of great concern to Spivak. In other words, the violence inflicted by the Occidental upon the Oriental is of great concern to Spivak, in the words of Sale. But Spivak simply mentions the violence influenced by the Western forms of thought upon the East. Right? According to the critic in case, you need to use or switch between the keywords. That is what I was intending to say. She takes the third world to be a creation of the West that locks non-Western cultures into an imperial representation. Another key term, imperialism. Make sure that you mention whenever you have this for your TEE. This is important. I expect short questions from any of these three critics too, apart from an essay question. That is why I am spending too much time and energy on this. Moving on to another concept, mimicry. Okay, mimicry is a concept in literary theory put forth by Bhabha. I suppose you are all familiar with this term mimicry. Okay, when you turn on your television, you must have seen many renowned actors performing mimicry. What do you mean by mimicry in simple terms? Can you give me a one-word answer? Mimicry. In simple terms, imitation. Here also Bhabha refers to imitation. Who is imitating whom? The colonized imitates the colonizer. Yes, that is the people who are marginalized in course of time try to imitate the colonizer. We will look into that in detail. Mimicry designates a gap between the norm of civility as presented by European Enlightenment and its distorted colonial imitation. So in a way it serves as the sly weapon of anti-colonial civility and is an ambivalent mixture of disobedience. So this disobedience is shown by the colonized towards the colonized. Hence the term mimicry becomes significant. They try to mimic the colonizer. It is a sign of a double articulation, in a way a complex strategy of discipline and regulation. Just to mention something outside of the textbook, you must have heard of Macaulay's minutes with respect to the Indian context. This Macaulay's minutes on education defines mimicry as, I quote, a class of interpreters between us and the millions of whom we govern, a class of persons Indian in blood and color, but English in taste, opinions, morals and intellect. So, through English education, they tried to develop a class of people who could stand as if a mediator, as if a platform where the colonizer could communicate with the colonized. Similarly, in course of time, the colonized began to make use of this as if a weapon against the colonizer. Yes. So the details are also given in the study material. When you get time, you could read in detail. I'll just mention a few points quickly because we are consuming a lot of time, it seems. Yeah. Colonial power undermines its own authority and can paradoxically provide the means for native resistance. It was a form of resistance by the native. The site of resistance, that is the strategic reversal of the process of domination that looks the colonial power squarely in the eye, is marked by hybridity and in-between space. So these two are also key concepts in post-colonialism: hybridity and in-betweenness. I am not elaborating on these aspects as these are not mentioned for detailed study in your study material. Alright. Let me once again repeat that this is a vast theory with lots of important aspects, but we will be limiting our discussion towards whatever is mentioned in your study material. So moving on to another interesting section, section 4.2, said on Heart of Darkness. So we already brought into discussion this particular work titled Heart of Darkness. I am very sure that you are aware of the author of this particular work. Who wrote this work? Joseph Conrad. Correct. Now comes a question. Answer carefully. Can you tell me the genre, the exact genre of this work? Is it a drama, a novel, or what is the exact genre of this work? I see novella among the answers. Have you heard of this term novella? Well, that's the correct answer. It is a novella. Always remember, Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad is a novella. Yes, from the chat box I could read short novel, exactly. So, how I help my students is likewise, I tell them a novella comes between a short story and a novel. In the sense, it is lengthier than a short story but shorter than a novel. With respect to the length, I mean the page numbers, and I also teach them this equation. Novel greater than novella greater than short story. Yeah, if it is a face-to-face lesson, I remember me writing this on board. Yeah, so you can also remember a novella is a short novel. Yeah. So this is a novella, Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad. So our text mentioned, our study material mentions some of the aspects. I'll just quickly go through the most important ones. To Edward Said, the imperialist politics and aesthetics which this particular novella embodies was in the closing years of the 19th century. And aesthetics, politics and epistemology which were almost unavoidable and inevitable. I'm not sure whether you know the premise of The Heart of Darkness. See, this is a novella that examines the horrors of Western colonialism. Here, Western colonialism is depicted as a phenomenon that tarnishes not only the lands and people it exploits, but also those in the West who advance it. So it is a story of, no, you don't have to go into the detail. If interested, you can read about it, maybe online. Our text doesn't mention the detailed story, so there wouldn't be an essay to illustrate how Heart of Darkness can be considered as if a post-colonial text. That wouldn't be a question. Hence, you don't have to pay much attention towards that. Yes. The general characteristic of reading in post-colonial criticism is that a text, by text we are referring to a work of literature. Here, in this case, maybe Heart of Darkness is read back from the perspective of the colonized. So this is what is done in post-colonial criticism. We read this particular work from the perspective of the colonized. So such reading rejects the claims to universalism made on behalf of canonical Western literature. So such a reading rejects the claims to universalism made on behalf of canonical Western literature, and it also seeks to show its limitations of outlook, especially in its general inability to empathize across boundaries of cultural and ethnic difference. Cultural and ethnic difference. Another term in case of postcolonial theory and criticism is diaspora. I didn't mention that because in your study material diaspora has not been specified. Have you heard of this term diaspora? Yeah, racism is also a related term. You mentioned that somewhere in the textbook, right? Yeah, diaspora. But I think when I explain the concept, you must be aware of diaspora. Maybe you are not familiar with the term. See, diaspora refers to the dispersion of people from their original homeland. Exactly. Yeah, persons who move out of their homeland, they could be termed as diasporans. Diaspora is basically the movement, migration or scattering of people away from their ancestral homeland. Yeah, that is also an associated term. You don't have to move into the detail. Nevertheless, you need to know the importance of post-colonialism. That is, with respect to our study on three important aspects, such as Orientalism, subalternity, and mimicry, with respect to three important critics, namely Spivak and Bhabha, respectively. We understand that there are some issues faced by the results of colonialism. So one of the problems that is mentioned in the text Orientalism is that the people suffered from too many influences from the colonizer. That is an issue mentioned. And one of the challenges of post-colonial theory even today is to come to terms with specific local conditions and with comparison that can be discerned in and between them. So this falls under the last paragraph of page number 26. Make sure that you read that. There is also this task of trying to know the story of colonial and neo-colonial engagements in all their complexity. That is, when you read a work of literature with respect to this post-colonial reading, you need to find some time to understand the story of how all these happened. Finding a proper language and terminology for representing those engagements in literary outputs is another major challenge. That is, in order to record all these in another language which might not be into prominence today, would all be possible challenges of post-colonial criticism. So there is also a mention of some of the critical aspects put forth by some post-colonial critics, that is criticisms on post-colonialism. Ahmad, an Indian critic, he objects the post-colonial theorists, and another critic is Arif Dirlik. So he sees the post-colonial intellectual as complexious in feeding into the goals of the capitalist frame of post-colonial theory. If you could remember at least a few names of these criticisms and critics, it would be great for you. And there is also another person, Appaya, who argues that the post-colonial theory and postmodernism are all spaces created by capitalism for the purpose of marketing cultural products in the developing world. So all these were criticisms against post-colonial theory. Just remember the names at least of these critics. Alright, that would be a specific question, but it would be wonderful if you could end your essay on a mention of these aspects. So to sum up what we have discussed for the last 1.5 hours maybe. So here we discussed an overview of post-colonial criticism and theory within the limitations of our MEG syllabus and study material. So we looked at what post-colonialism is, and we looked into post-colonial criticism and theory with specific focus to Spivak and Bhabha. So remember, they are holy trinity of post-colonial theory. Each of them is different and important because of their contributions towards the field of post-colonialism. When we discussed Edward Said, we said that his main contribution to the field of post-colonial theory is undoubtedly the concept of Orientalism. There is also a work titled Orientalism, study the date if possible. And moving on to Spivak, the concept is subalternity. So she answers the question, can the subaltern speak, with a no. Here she means to say that women are doubly marginalized or doubly effaced. If you look into section 4.6, there is this term used, doubly effaced, underline and study, because that would be a key word in your, that should be a key word in your answer sheet. I know this is not exactly mentioned in the text as such. Regarding Homi Bhabha, his theorizing about mimicry builds on the potential for irreverence and mockery in the colonized or colonizer relationship. Okay, so all three critics are influenced by Foucault's views on power and discourse. Remember, as I mentioned, Spivak was specifically influenced by Derrida, whereas Bhabha was particularly influenced by Lacan. Before we conclude, I would like to invite your attention towards the concept of otherness. Doubly effaced, I could read from the chat box. I mentioned that in class means doubly marginalized. That is, the subaltern women became marginalized in two aspects. Firstly, because of gender, and secondly, because of their subaltern status. Okay? Yes, that's all. And make sure that you mention that term. So if you look into unit 1 of block 8, there you can see section 1.4, otherness. So make sure that you study this. In the sense, it's almost the same aspect. In theories of ideology and also in cultural studies, the other is defined by the norms of a dominant social order dictated by sexuality, race or ethnicity. So we study this as part of feminism too. I remember explaining this when I took this lecture on 20th century literary developments. There I mentioned how in the second sex it was mentioned that man considers women as the other. Okay, that was mentioned. And with respect to this post-colonialist context, this is significant in the sense, in post-colonialism, the colonial subject is imagined as demeaned, okay, as if subjugated. That is, they become the other. We already discussed that when we discussed the aspects in textbook. But make sure that you also understand this section, section 1.4, otherness. In psychoanalysis too, this is reflected. That is also mentioned here. When you read about Jacques Lacan, you get much clarity. Okay, so the reason why I specified this section is because I have seen short questions, short essays for 5 marks from this section. This used to be a typical assignment question. So you can certainly expect this as part of your TEE with respect to short questions. Maybe you could expect otherness, and very often people are not aware from which section this is asked from. Okay, that is a common confusion. So when it comes to otherness, you could relate and write, connect it to connect it to contemporary literary theories. You can write from post-colonialism, you can write from psychoanalysis, and you could also bring in a bit of feminist theory. Okay, that is how you need to frame your answers. So with that, we conclude this session on post-colonial theory.